revolt that happened here that was actually led by him, Josephus Flavius, who lived in the Galilee. He was a rebel himself. He was a person who was revolting against the Romans, and he turned a spy for the Romans because he became a Roman historian and a Roman writer. But first he was rebelling against the Romans. I don't know if you've heard the story of him, how he deceived people. How Josephus Flavius led a rebellion that was failing in a place called Litvata, up in the Galilee somewhere in the north. And he have convinced to ask the people to not give in themselves, but to commit suicide, then give in. And a lot jumped to their death in a place they were hiding, and he gave himself in to the Romans. Later he became part of the Roman Empire as a historian, as a writer, and he talked about Masada as we were down in Masada, if you remember, and the books and the writings that he wrote in the 1st century. So Herod was mentioned here, crushing a rebellion against him, a place for the rebels who hid in the caves. Yeah, so we're talking 1st century BC. And a place that the rebellion against Herod started here. Later, we had the other rebellion before the destruction of the temple, the Great Revolt, right? You've heard about the Great Revolt from the year 67 to the year 70, which led to the destruction of the temple. And part of that rebellion started up here in the areas of the Galilee. This was a place where you had a lot of rebels that would also seek refuge or a place to hide in these caves. It's natural rock formation, it's a limestone, and all these were dug by people in ancient times to stay in these caves. So this mountain is called Mount Magdal. The other one over on the other side, a smaller one, less impressive, it's called Mount Nitai. And the passage we're walking through is the beautiful nature, the beautiful birds, and a spring actually that's coming from the mountains. This would be the shortest way to go from the Sea of Galilee, right down below us, Magdala, that we're going to visit later today, to the village of Nazareth from the time of Jesus. This is actually also a place to create a passage called the Jesus Trail, which starts in Nazareth, something that we're trying to revive, and there is hikes that starts up on a place called Mount Precipice, a leaping mountain of Nazareth, where they wanted to throw Jesus off the cliffs in Nazareth, where the trail starts and goes from Nazareth all the way through here and reaches to the Sea of Galilee and finish at Capernaum, which we're going to be there today. There are marked trails, actually, the trail is marked there. So what we're going to do, we're just going to walk through it, enjoy the nature, take some pictures, and reach just further in to see the beautiful view and maybe some water that's coming down as part of the spring. Okay?
Okay.
So
Carl, these are the horns here and here.
Are you going to use your microphone?
what's that?
Are you going to use your microphone today?
Yes, I am now, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, boo boo. Stand still. Stand still.
Other side of the mountain is very impressive mountain also that has a couple of caves straight ahead. Nitai, dry spring. I've been here a couple of years ago and there is actually water here, but again it's been very little rain every year. So up until now we don't see any water in the spring here.
This is the Jesus Trail from Nazareth, which is beyond the mountains there. This is the trail. How he comes by through the mountains. Yeah. That marking is to identify either Jesus trail and the Jewish trail. They're different markings. And the Sea of Galilee is down to here. It's a new town that's been built. Caves. People would hide out. Walking up the trail. Just a little bit. Not going to be long. Wow.
Lost him. Gets him out of range.
Yeah. This is his trail. Wow. What do you say? It takes 3 days to get through?
No, a day.
A day to get through.
From Capernaum to Nazareth, 22 miles. A day, I thought he said. That's a long day, but
Yeah, just walking.
yeah, could make it in a day.
It's beautiful.
Maybe that room short. That's why we have to wait.
I was going to say, name that bird. As the guy is rolling down the stairs.
Welcome to Magdal, the hometown of Mary Magdalene. This is almost certainly the very place where Jesus cast the 7 demons out of her, right in this town, somewhere where we'll be walking this afternoon. He met her and cast those 7 demons out of her. Now her life was so transformed by that she followed Jesus throughout his ministry. She provided money for Jesus and his disciples. She was there at the foot of the cross when Jesus was crucified, when all the other disciples had run away. And she was the first person that Jesus appeared to when he rose from the dead. So let's come back to the present day. First of all, see what was here 10 years ago. 10 years ago here, we'd be back in America, because this was called Hawaii Beach.
This is for Brian. Can you make sure he gets the water?
Thanks. Hawaii Beach. It was a holiday camp. It was spreading on down to the lake, made of concrete bungalows, built in the 1950s. By the year 2005, it had started to get tatty. People didn't want to stay in concrete bungalows anymore. They wanted posh hotels, so it was up for sale. So then along comes this Mexican priest, Father Juan Solana. He comes up from Jerusalem, and he sees the sign which used to be at the roundabout saying Magdala, Hawaii. So he thought, Magdala, that must be where Mary Magdalene lived. There must be a church there. There must be something to commemorate her life with Jesus. But there was nothing but the rather run-down holiday camp, which he found out was for sale. So he thought, if I could buy it, I could build a hotel, which we see going up here, to commemorate the life of Mary Magdalene. And, of course, where people could come and worship Jesus. He didn't really know what he was getting into, that he was going to end up funding a huge archaeological excavation, because Fortunately, he was able to buy a bit more land than just Hawaii Beach. He was able to buy 4 plots altogether, which gave him quite a large area, which turned out to be virtually the whole of the 1st century town of Magdal. Now, before he was allowed to start building the hotel, they had to do an archaeological survey. And down by the lake, they found this large 12-metre diameter fish pool, all plastered, pretty intact, where the 1st century fishermen used to sort out their catch. Then they excavated further and they found this marketplace, this large marketplace of 24 shops dating back to Jesus' time. And then when they were excavating the synagogue, they discovered this stone. Yeah, they were so surprised to find it there that they even managed to scratch part of the top of it, because they thought there was going to be another metre of soil to dig through. But instead they managed to hit the top of this with the digger. This has become known as the Magdal stone. We believe it's a model of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which still existed the whole time that this synagogue was in action. So we've got to try and interpret some of the symbols on this stone to see how it can be the model, the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Now I don't know if the people over, well, I'll tell you what, I'll do the sides first. Then if you want to move around here, you can see the top. The sides are the same both sides, and what we've got here, we've got a series of archways with more archways inside. A kind of corridor, a colonnade going round the great tall central holy place. Now, on the end there, we've got what we believe is either an oil lamp or an incense burner. It's possible that one side could be an oil lamp, the other side could be an incense burner, because they're very slightly different. So now we can come to the front. Now this is where some of you will need to move, because you need to see the front. Or if I stand this side, perhaps most of you can see what I'm talking about. Now, what we got here, we've got 2 pillars of the temple, and we've got kind of like an archway. You can sit there if you like. You can sit there, you're all right. We've got a kind of like an archway, a window into the holy place. A view into it. And first of all, we see this box here. Now this could either be the altar of sacrifice, or we're beginning to think more likely now it was the incense altar, where they burnt incense twice a day at the same time as having the twice daily sacrifices outside. So we now think that's the incense altar. Then behind it, not standing on top of it, we've got this menorah, 7-branch candelabra menorah with 3 feet. Now it's an important menorah because it's the oldest menorah that's been found in the whole of Israel, the oldest carved menorah found in a public place in the whole of Israel, and we think that's what it looked like with the 3 feet. Now if you go to Jerusalem, you'll see opposite the western wall up the big main staircase this big gold menorah to go in the 3rd temple, which they're hoping to build any day now. And it's got this big solid octagonal base, not at all like that. That is copied from Titus's arch in Rome. Now Titus, he was the new emperor's son, and he went into the Second Temple when it was burnt down in AD 17. Before they burnt it down, they were very, very careful to get everything out, everything that was valuable. And they took everything to Rome, and they carried it through the streets, and they carved this arch with this carving on it, and that's where they copied it from. But we think that the Roman sculptor carved it like that to look as if it was being carried on their shoulders. Now that's not enough evidence for us to think that that's what the menorah looked like, but we do have some more evidence. In Jerusalem there's the Burnt House Museum. Now a house that was burnt down in AD 70 at the same time as the Second Temple was burnt down. And on the plaster wall of of this house, there's a menorah carved with the same triangular tripod base as that one. Right. Now we've got to look at these 2 vases each side. We've got these 2 vases. Now we think those represent olive trees. Now they don't, obviously a vase you could carry olive oil in, but there's a new school of thought. I mean, we did think one was a vase for oil, one was a vase for water, but we do now think, if I can find the spot, if I can find the place, here it is. In Zechariah verse 4, in Zechariah chapter 4, verses 1 to 4, he has this rather strange vision of a lampstand with 2 olive trees. It says, I see 2 olive trees, one on each side of the lampstand. So we think that those are the olive trees standing either side of the menorah lampstand. A bit strange, I know, but some of this is based on vision, which we'll find out more about in a minute. Some of these carvings are based on visions that people have had throughout the Bible. Now, we're going to go inside the holy place. Well, we've already started to look inside it, now we've actually got to go inside. Now, the next thing you saw rather, would be the tables of showbread, where they put the 12 loaves of bread every Shabbat to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Then the following Shabbat, those 12 loaves were eaten by the priest standing in the holy place, and 12 more loaves were put on there. We think these upside down cup shapes here, trophy cup shapes, were the showbread tables. So now we've got to try and find the showbread. Well, we think the hearts of the showbread. We've got one heart here, and another one there on its side, another one there on its side. We've got one here upside down, and we've got 2 very small ones there. That makes 6. But if we were to double them by counting the loaves on the top, that would make the 12 loaves of showbread. Then we come here to these like palm trees. Again, we have to look in the Bible to see what those were. Again, it's another vision. Ezekiel, when he's in captivity in Babylon, he has this vision of the new temple in chapter 40 and 41. And he sees throughout it, covered it in pink there, carved palm tree decorations. There were carved palm tree decorations on the columns. Carved palm trees, carved palm trees. He's seeing throughout the temple there were carved palm trees. And we think that is what these are, carved palm trees that decorated the inside of the temple. Then we've got this almond flower here, this 6-petaled almond flower. A very popular symbol of Judaism in the 1st century. You see it a lot on ossuary boxes, bone boxes. If you were to go to the Dominus Flevit Church in Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives, you'd see all these boxes with the almond flowers on them. They used to put the bones in when the body had rotted away. There's a cave there that you can see all these in. Sorry, it's not very comfortable down there. I couldn't sit on that. So how does that relate to the temple? Well, when the Romans went in and destroyed the temple in AD 70, as we've already talked about, Titus, he took a slave in, well, he took a freed Jewish slave in with him. And this Jewish slave named Josephus, he fancied himself as a historian. He wrote lots of books about the Roman exploits. And he says that when he went into the temple, the veil, the great curtain that hung down, that was torn in half when Jesus died on the cross, the veil was decorated and embroidered with flowers. So we think that's the veil. Now we've got to come behind the veil into the Holy of Holies, and this is where you really do need to get up and come and have a look round here. Thanks, I haven't got it out the way. Thank you. Now around here we've got the Holy of Holies, where they believe God dwelt in the second temple, and we've got there we've got here 2 wheels and some triangles. Now how on earth can that represent God? Well, we've got to have a look again at another vision. This time it's Daniel's vision. When he's also in Babylon, Daniel chapter 7, verse 9 and 10. I watched as thrones were put in place, and the Ancient One sat down to judge. His clothing was as white as snow, his hair was like purest wool. He sat on a fiery throne, with wheels of blazing fire, and a river of fire was pouring out, flowing from his presence. So there we've got those 2 wheels of blazing fire at the bottom of God's throne. There we've got the triangles of fire flowing out, pouring from his presence. We've got the bottom half of God's throne. You can't depict God on there because that would be idolatry. So they've just shown God by the bottom half of God's throne. So there's quite a bit of vision, imagination on there, things that are described in the Bible to make this model of the second temple. We think it was used for putting the Torah on before it was due to be read, because an attendant would be by the side of that. And when it tells us in Nazareth that when Jesus went into Nazareth and he went into the synagogue, he stood up, an attendant passed him the scroll. Jesus opened it, read it, and gave it back to the attendant. We think the attendant would have kept the scroll on there. We're not saying this was in Nazareth, but that's what it was used for here. Putting the scroll on, lifting it up to be read, and it's put back down on there again. It's the only one that's been found in the whole of Israel. It's very unique. So we're going to have a look at the synagogue now. It is certain that Jesus actually taught him. If you go to Capernaum, where everybody wants to go, because it's mentioned in the Bible, you won't see Jesus' synagogue there. That's a 3rd century synagogue. Whereas here we can see the actual synagogue that Jesus must have come into. We can't say for definite he came here because we have no biblical proof he came here. But behind us over there we've got a valley. That is the walking route to Nazareth. That's about a 2-day walk from Nazareth to the Galilee. So when Jesus came to the Galilee area, he'd have walked through that valley. This is the first town he'd have come upon, a town of about 4,000 people. This synagogue was outside the town. It was a place to welcome strangers. Jesus must have come through into this synagogue. Because synagogues weren't holy places, they were meeting places, a place to welcome strangers, a place where you read the Torah once a week, and it was also a school. So we've got the entrance here, beckoning Jesus, welcoming him into the town. He must have actually come and stood on that very ground that we can see there, because this is the actual ground level from the 1st century. The entrance doesn't face Jerusalem because the entrance is only faced Jerusalem after the Second Temple was destroyed in AD 70. You went up to Jerusalem to worship God, so you don't need to have the entrance facing Jerusalem because the temple's still there. Now, I was about to give you some biblical evidence that Jesus came here. Now, if we look at Matthew 4, verse 23, it says, Jesus travelled to the region of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. And he healed every kind of disease and illness. So he's travelling all around the Galilee, teaching in the synagogues. He must have actually come to this one. Now, this part of the synagogue is called the Beit Midrash. This is the school. This is where they studied the Torah. This is where children would learn to read. And we have this stone here. Yeah, this stone here with 2 grooves in it. You could unroll the Torah on that stone. The grooves could hold it in place. And you could study the Torah and teach children to read. So this was the school area of the synagogue. Let's go now and have a look at the main meeting area. We've got space for 150 people to sit here. We've got 3 rows of seats. This is something that would well have happened in this synagogue on the Sabbath day. So Jesus healed on the Sabbath in a synagogue. It could easily have been this one. If it wasn't this one, we can imagine Jesus standing there, and we can imagine this happening here. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was teaching in the synagogue, he saw a woman who had been crippled by an evil spirit. She'd been bent double for 18 years and was unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Dear woman, you are healed of your sickness." Then he touched her, and instantly she could stand straight. How she praised God. But the leader in charge of the synagogue was angry that Jesus had healed her on the Sabbath day. "There are 6 days of the week for working," he said to the crowd. "Come on those days to be healed, but not on the Sabbath." But Jesus replied, "You hypocrites." It tells us in Matthew 12 verse 9, there was another occasion in a synagogue. Again, we can easily imagine it happening here, where a man with a crippled hand was in the synagogue, and the Pharisees tried to trick Jesus by saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" And Jesus said, "You wouldn't leave your ox or donkey without water on the Sabbath." Of course it is. Stretch out your hand and be healed. And they tried to find a reason then to arrest Jesus. Well, we can imagine him saying this here, because these people were hypocrites. There we've got the best seats in the synagogue, the front row. There we've got the marketplace. I can imagine Jesus standing right here and saying this. "What sorrow awaits you Pharisees, for you love to sit in the seats of honour in the synagogues and receive respectful greetings as you walk in the marketplaces. Yes, what sorrow awaits you." There we've got the best seats, there we've got the marketplace. I can imagine Jesus saying that right here. So we'll come around the side here and look at this mosaic. Here we've got a very rare, or in fact unique, 1st century mosaic in the synagogue. This is the only synagogue in the whole of Israel that has a mosaic in it. Originally it would have gone all the way round. It's a very pure form of mosaic because anything other than just single lines or patterns would be idolatry. Later synagogues you'll see very beautiful mosaics with pictures of people, animals, plants, all sorts of things. That paganism had crept in. This is really a pure form of 1st century synagogue mosaic art. Just a single line going round and round to infinity. The one exception is this rather beautiful circle here divided into 8 petals. This is a very rare design in Israel. We only find it here in a house over the other side of the town, Herod's Palace in Masada, and an old house in Jerusalem. It's a very, very rare pattern. Now, what happened to it? Why isn't it going all the way round the synagogue? Well, I'll tell you what happened in AD 66. We've dated this synagogue by the coins we've found here. The coins are 5 to 9 AD, 29, that's when Jesus would have been here, 43 and 63. 63 is the last coin we found here. So something happened to the synagogue after 63 AD. In 66 there was the Great Jewish Revolt, where the Jews were rebelling about the heavy taxation, unfair treatment by the Romans. It started in Caesarea and spread throughout the whole of the countryside. And so the Emperor Nero sends his best general Vespasian over here with a big army to put down the revolt. They're going to head for Jerusalem, where the Second Temple was, where the main rebels were. So you've got to try and find a way of slowing down the Roman advance, because they needed time to get in lots of food into Jerusalem to withstand the long Roman siege. And so what they did, they chose to build city walls around certain towns along the way that the Romans would have to attack, and that would slow the advance down. In fact, it did slow the advance down for 3 years. They took 3 years to get to Jerusalem. And Magdal here was one of the towns they chose to build a city wall in. Over there we've got the marketplace, and you can just see where the entrances to some of the shops are filled with rocks and rubble. Over there, underneath that corrugated roof, that was the main walking route into the town, the main road into the town. That's all blocked with pillars. The wall went from the lake all the way up to the mountainside. Where did they get the stone from to build that wall? They actually demolished their own synagogue. They pulled the synagogue down. Over there, the entrance to the road is blocked with synagogue pillars. So they took their synagogue down. The mosaic would have gone all the way round. As they were pulling the synagogue down, they took up the mosaic because it's valuable, but they didn't have time, fortunately, to take up this piece. So they pulled their own synagogue down, they covered it with soil, which is that's accounted for why it is so beautifully preserved. If they hadn't pulled it down, the Romans had never come, this would have been built on top of, we wouldn't be able to see it. But what happened when the Romans came? Well, the Romans landed in the north, but they didn't come from the north. They circled round the mountain to Tiberias, 3 or 4 miles away, came in from the south, which was poorly defended. They killed all the young and old people, the rest they took away as slaves. So Magdal was left abandoned then for the next 2,000 years. Before we leave here, have a look at the pillars. You can see the remains of painted plaster on them. You can see the remains of plaster on the walls over there. What a beautifully colourful place it would have been, vibrant with colour. And we can just be grateful that it was actually pulled down and preserved for us to see today. Last thing before we leave here, when Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene, he said to her, go back to Galilee with the disciples and tell them to wait for me there. So Mary Magdalene would have come back to the Galilee. The disciples would have gone on probably to Capernaum. She'd have come back into the synagogue in our hometown where she knew everybody, and she would have proclaimed in that space we can see there that she saw Jesus crucified, dead, buried, put in the tomb, finished. But then on the third day he rose again, he appeared to me, he's alive forevermore, he is the Messiah. That would be been proclaimed in this synagogue, and we believe there would have been a group of Messianic believers living in this town. Maybe that's even the reason they had the stone built and this beautiful mosaic put into the synagogue. So we're going to have a look round now where they kept the Torah. We won't spend too long out in the sun. Here's a small room called the Genisa, where they kept the Torah scrolls that were worn out, that they weren't using anymore. In the next room we have the Aron Kodesh, where they kept the Torah that they were using, the good scrolls, the ones in good condition. And if you want to risk standing on this wall, you can look in there at a very dusty mosaic, and you can see a blue framework. That's where a cupboard would have been, they would have kept the Torah in. So we've got the Aron Kodesh, the Genisa. These are 3 market shops. And behind us here we have 24 market shops. This was a very important fish market. They sold fish, dried salted fish from here all over the Roman Empire. The Greeks knew Magdala as Tarakia, the place of salted fish. And it's quite possible that when Jesus fed the 5,000 and the 4,000 with fish, they would have been dried salted fish from this very market. This particular shop we're standing by over there has 3 pools in it. That would have been for selling fresh fish. They would have filled the pools with water which came from a well. Over there by where the wall is slightly higher, there are 3 steps going down to a well, a very shallow well because there's a lot of water under the ground. They'd have filled the pools with nice cool well water, put the fish in, maybe put some palm leaves over the top. That would have kept them fresh. So a very vibrant market here, and in one of the shops we found hidden a Roman sword. So whether they managed to get a sword off one of the Romans and then hid it, well, we don't know. We don't know how it got there, but that's a possibility. As we come up here into the shade, you can see the synagogue pillars.
Where is the sword here?
Sorry?
The sword?
Oh, that's out in Haifa University. They're sort of, I can't remember the right word, where they have to preserve it.
Restore.
Yeah. Conserve it, that's the right
There
word.
you go.
Yeah, here we've got the synagogue pillars. Now they left a gap here, because they didn't know when the Romans were going to come. So they could go in and out, because this was pulled down some months before the Romans actually arrived. They could go in and out, and when the Romans came over the hill, they could block it in. This was the main way into the town. Right, now we're going to head over there, where there hopefully will be some shade, and look at the Jewish ritual purification bath. The people who lived in these houses, they didn't want to mix with the ordinary people down in the lake, and they had their own Jewish ritual purification baths called the mikveh, built in their own houses. Now, whereas all the other ones in Israel are plastered because they rely on water coming down from the roof and the of metal. They're filled with underground water. There's an awful lot of water under the ground here, at least there would be if the lake were full, and at the moment it's at a 100-year low, the lowest it's been in 100 years. Also, we've had 2 years of very little rain, but I would imagine before global warming and all that came along, the winters would have been a lot wetter, there'd be more water here. So where does the underground water come from? Well, it comes from this behind us, this big mountain behind us, Mount Arbel. It's a limestone mountain. Limestone absorbs water like a sponge. During the winter, when it rains on the mountain, the water trickles through the rock under the ground here. It runs down to the lake. So all they had to do with the mikveh here was to dig a hole in the ground, line it with stones, don't plaster or cement it, the water comes out from the bottom. It fills the mikveh. We've got 2 each side of the path, and there's another very clever plumbing system here because you can't have a mikveh just with underground water. You've got to have some water coming in from the top. So underneath us here there's a spring. You can't see it at the moment because it's buried. A spring which leads to both mikvehs and adds water from the top. If you look carefully at the mikveh, you'll see the entrances where the water comes in from the top. So we've got water coming out from under the ground and water in from the top. So we'll go down and have a look at them. There's 2 either side of the path, probably one for men and one for women. Here's where the spring comes in to add water to the top of the mikveh over there. Water's also coming from the spring this side to add water to that mikveh over there. And then water's coming from that one joining into this one, as well as water coming up from under the ground. Water's coming from that one into this one, as well as water's coming up from under the ground. They're all linked. And there's an overflow system going under the path here, so they don't flood the houses, to take water down to the lake. It would have been beautiful, clear, crystal clear, filtered spring water, which you could have used all year round.
Magdal was a rich woman.
Fish market. Maybe I misunderstood. Were you saying that that's where you might have got the fish to feed the 5,000?
Yeah. Well, he got the fish from a boy. The boy probably got them from the market. Yes.
Mosaic.
Right, here we have this other mosaic floor. It's covered in dust at the moment. This is what it should look like. So it's covered in dust at the moment. It's got the same design as the one we've just seen in the synagogue, the House of Dice. We call this the House of Dice. Why do we call it that? Because when they excavated this house, they found 2 tiny bone Roman dice. 1 centimetre cube made of donkey bone with numbers carved on them, dots carved on them, just like we have dice of today. And I'm imagining that when the Romans...
See that picture again?
Yeah, the other picture, picture of the... Yeah. It's got another one of those wheels in the centre divided into 8 petals. It's so dusty in there, it's very hard to see it. But the dice, how did they get there? Well, Romans always carried dice for gambling. They liked gambling, and obviously they found something quite valuable in this floor, maybe a gold cup or something, and they gambled for it, and whoever lost threw the dice down in anger, and there they stayed for 2,000 years. And it reminds us how at the foot of the cross, when Jesus was crucified, there was his seamless robe. It wasn't made up of a patchwork or in pieces. It was one continuously woven robe. and how the Roman soldiers at the foot of the cross threw dice for that road. They would have used the same kind of bone Roman dice they found in this room. And that fulfills the prophecy of Psalm 22 verse 18. They divide my garments among themselves and throw dice for my clothing. They would have used the same dice at the foot of the cross, same kind of dice as they used in this floor. So we're going to go and have a look at the church now. We'll get into some shade. These are some forward. All that brown soil over there, that would be the edge of the lake. That's where the first century fishing boats would tie up. They'd land there, then they would unload their fish into where we can see these ruins down here. That was the port market, that was the fish market where they sold the fresh fish. So you'd land on the shore there, unload your fish into the port market, and that would be sold then, presumably, to people to salt, to sell up in the next market. Now, I want us to imagine something that could have happened here. We're a big crowd here, we're waiting on the shore here, we're waiting for Jesus to come from the other side of the lake to land on the shore here. We're all waiting for him because wherever Jesus goes, something amazing happens. This is Mark 5 verse 21. Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered round him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her, heal her so she can live." Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. So we're going to now walk in the footsteps of Jesus down to the port market on this first century road. We're going to go under the church and see what happened next.
He put out all the professional